I am Sierra Hart, 34, and the lily in my hand felt heavier than the oak casket at the front of St. Bartholomew Funeral Home in Philadelphia. The air was thick with perfume and pretense, a mixture that clung to the velvet drapes and the whispered condolences. The Whitakers stood near the front, as if they were hosting a gala instead of mourning. Margaret Whitaker dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, though her tears had long since dried. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks, his face smooth as marble. Their sons, Nate and Grant, received guests like minor celebrities, their tailored suits gleaming under the soft lights. I stood at the back, my black dress plain, my heels damp from the drizzle outside. No one looked my way. No one ever did. I wasn't part of their perfect family portrait. I was the girl who never quite fit, who was reminded at every turn that I should be grateful they took me in. Yet the man in that casket, Arthur Whitaker, their father, my so-called grandfather, was the only person who ever treated me as if I truly belonged. When the service ended, the guests drifted toward the reception hall. I stayed behind, still gripping the lily. The pianist began to play something soft and distant, and for a moment, I closed my eyes. I remembered Arthur's voice reading to me by the fireplace, his hand resting on my shoulder as I fell asleep on the couch, the smell of cedar and tobacco that always clung to him. He used to call me his girl. Now he was gone, and I had never felt more invisible. As the family passed me on their way out, Margaret brushed close enough that her perfume made my throat burn. She didn't look at me. Daniel's eyes met mine for a split second before sliding away. Nate and Grant walked past, their whispers clipped and smug. I caught only fragments, something about assets, trusts, and public image. My stomach turned. Even in death, Arthur was still their currency. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. I walked through the alley beside the funeral home, the heels of my shoes clicking against the wet bricks. I could have gone straight home to my cramped third-floor apartment in Queen Village, but grief and curiosity share the same restlessness. Instead, I took the long way, past the small cafe Arthur and I used to visit every Sunday morning. Back then, the walls were painted mint green and smelled of chocolate and cinnamon. Now it had been modernized into something cold and chrome. Still, I stepped inside, ordered a coffee I didn't want, and sat at a corner table, tracing my finger along the rim of the cup. Arthur's kindness was always a mystery to me. He was nothing like Margaret and Daniel. While they built walls with money, he built bridges with simple acts. He once told me that families aren't always about blood, they're about truth. I never understood what he meant until that day. When I finally left the cafe, the city felt sharper somehow. The streets glistened under the streetlights, and every window seemed to hide a secret. Instead of heading home, I found myself standing before the wide stone steps of City Hall. The thought had haunted me for years, my adoption papers. Every time I'd asked about them, Margaret would say, "You were lucky, Sierra. Some kids don't get homes at all." Her smile would tighten, her tone making it clear that the topic was closed. But today, with Arthur gone, something in me cracked. I was done accepting silence. Inside, the records office smelled of old paper and tired fluorescent light. I filled out a request for my adoption file, writing my name carefully, as if neat handwriting could make me more legitimate. When I handed it to the clerk, she adjusted her glasses and studied the form. Her name tag read E. Caldwell. She looked to be in her 70s, her hair twisted into a neat silver bun. "This record's unusual," she said, squinting. "The seal's not from Philadelphia County. And these signatures, see here? They're identical. That's not standard." A cold shiver ran through me. "What does that mean?" Her expression softened. "It means something's off, Miss Hart. I shouldn't say this, but your file matches a missing persons report from 29 years ago. Same petition number, same date. There was a ransom note, no payment ever recorded." For a moment, the room tilted. I gripped the edge of the counter. "You're saying I wasn't adopted?" "I'm saying you should contact a search site and a legal advisor," she replied quietly. "If you were my granddaughter, I'd do it today." I walked out of City Hall in a daze, clutching the stamped copy request. The world looked the same, Traffic lights blinking red, taxis honking, but I felt unmoored. I sat on a bench outside and stared at the sky until the first stars flickered through the haze. Then, pulling out my phone, I searched the site I'd bookmarked months ago, National Missing Children and Family Reunification Network. I filled out the form, entered every detail I knew, names, dates, hospital records, even my blood type, and hit submit. A message appeared instantly. Inquiry submitted. The investigator will contact you within 48 hours. The fee was $129 for processing. I added another $250 for an expedited case review. The transaction went through. It felt like sending a signal into dark water. Terrifying but freeing. Back home, my apartment felt smaller than ever. I stared at the framed photo on my bookshelf, me at 8, standing on the Whitaker porch, wearing a ribbon too tight in my hair. My smile looked forced, the kind that hides fear. Behind me, the maple tree's branches clawed at the sky like something trapped. I pulled the photo from the frame, slipped it into a drawer, and locked it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the clerk's words echo in my head. Ransom note. No payment recorded. Around midnight, I brewed another pot of coffee and sat at the window, watching the streetlights flicker over the rain-slicked pavement. I thought about Arthur again, his quiet kindness, his knowing eyes. Had he tried to tell me something? When dawn broke, my phone buzzed with a new email. My heart stopped for a beat before I opened it. It was from the search site. Subject: Investigator Assignment. Body: Dear Sierra Hart, your case has been assigned to a private investigator specializing in long-term abduction and forgery cases. You will receive a call within 24 hours to verify personal information and begin confirmation procedures. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My coffee had gone cold. I opened my banking app, transferred $3,000 into a new account, and labeled it Truth Fund. For once in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission. I was hunting for answers. As the sun rose over the city skyline, the light hit my window, scattering gold across the walls. It felt like the first honest light I had seen in years. The call came early the next morning. My phone buzzed across the kitchen counter while I poured coffee into a chipped mug. Unknown number. For a moment, I hesitated. Every instinct told me this call could change everything. I answered. Miss Hart. The voice was steady, low, and professional. This is Jack Morales. I'm a private investigator working out of Chicago. I'm calling on behalf of Daniel and Elise Cooper of Cleveland, Ohio. My grip on the phone tightened. I don't know those names. He paused before speaking again. In 1996, their infant daughter was abducted from a grocery store parking lot. The file from the Philadelphia Records office you submitted flagged the same petition number attached to that case. You may be that child. I sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the half-open blinds and the dust floating in morning light. That can't be right. It's why we verify, he said gently. We'll send you a DNA kit. You'll swab your cheek, seal it, and a courier will return it to our lab. If the results align, we'll take it from there. My heartbeat felt loud enough to echo in the room. What if it's true? Then we move carefully, Jack replied. There's a standing reward fund for the Coopers' missing daughter, currently $248,000 for $100, including community donations and interest. They're aware someone from Philadelphia requested record access last week. They hope, more than anything, it's you. For a while, I couldn't say anything. Then I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Send the kit. By noon, a courier in a navy jacket arrived with a small white box. I followed the instructions, swabbing the inside of my cheek twice, sealing the envelope, and handing it back. The building smelled faintly of laundry detergent and soup, ordinary things in the middle of something extraordinary. When I texted my neighbor, Tia Reynolds, I didn't give details. Just hold my secrets. She replied almost instantly, always. Coffee at 5? At 5, I met her under the awning of her floral stall on South Street. The rain had started again, soft but steady, tapping against the display of roses and eucalyptus. She handed me a steaming cup. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said. Maybe I have, I murmured. Tia, I think the Whitakers lied about everything. About me. About how I came to live with them. Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. I told her about the clerk, the forged seal, and the missing person report. I didn't mention ransom or kidnapping.
Not yet.
When I finished, she squeezed my hand. If the truth is ugly, it's still the truth. But if it's beautiful, you deserve every piece of it. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was Jack. His voice was softer this time, like he was choosing every word carefully. Sierra, I have your results. I held my breath. The DNA is a 99.999% match. Your mitochondrial DNA aligns with Elise Cooper, and your autosomal markers align with Daniel Cooper. Your birth certificate, your real one, lists you as baby girl Cooper. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, the phone pressed to my ear. The world went still except for the faint hum of the radiator. You're saying they're my parents.
Yes.
And they've been looking for you for 29 years. Tears blurred my vision. I didn't even realize I was crying until I heard my own voice break. Where are they now? Cleveland Heights. They live in a white colonial with black shutters and a porch swing. They have 2 other children, Jonah and Lila, 28 and 26. They'd like to meet you when you're ready. Before that, I've contacted the Philadelphia police and the county prosecutor. The forged adoption petition is criminal. You won't have to face it alone. I nodded slowly. What happens next? I'll coordinate with Detective Helen Ruiz. She's been briefed. You'll likely be asked to provide a statement once warrants are issued. The call ended, but I stayed seated for a long time, staring at the paint blister on the wall above the radiator. I'd looked at that spot 100 times before. Now it felt like an anchor, something familiar in a world that had suddenly shifted. Later that night, I wrote out numbers on a notepad, grounding myself with practicality. 2 weeks off work without pay, $2,100. Travel to Cleveland by train, $220. Hotel for 3 nights, $400. Legal consultation, $450. Emotional courage, not priced. I was halfway through budgeting when Tia knocked on my door. She didn't wait for me to explain. She just handed me an envelope. Inside were crisp bills and a note written in her looping cursive. For the first night you sleep without a lie, $300. I pressed the envelope to my chest and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, my phone rang again. This time it was Detective Ruiz. Her voice was firm but kind. "Miss Hart, we've secured a warrant to examine the Whitaker documents. Please don't contact them. We'll handle that part. You've done the right thing." After the call, I opened my favorite cookbook, the one Arthur Whitaker had given me years ago. A lily from his funeral was still pressed between its pages, brittle and brown at the edges. I touched it gently, realizing that maybe he had known. Maybe that was why he was the only one who looked at me, without judgment. I closed the book and walked to the window. Outside, the street was waking up. Buses rumbling, neighbors heading to work, children dragging backpacks twice their size. It was all so normal. And yet, somewhere in Ohio, a family was waiting to learn that their daughter was alive. That night, I packed a small suitcase. Not for running away this time, but for running towards something real. I placed my old photograph, the one from the Whitaker porch, inside, along with the envelope from Tia and a printed copy of the DNA confirmation email. Then I sat on the floor beside my bed, letting the quiet wrap around me. When I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed of a porch swing creaking in the wind and a woman's voice calling a name I had never known was mine. The morning the police went to the Whitaker house, Philadelphia felt unnaturally quiet. A thin mist clung to the city, and the news vans were already gathering before breakfast. I wasn't there. Detective Helen Ruiz called me from the sidewalk just after 7. "We have the files," she said. "And something else. A ledger showing cash withdrawals, $58,750, made during the months of the ransom demand. We also recovered a key to a safety deposit box." I pressed my hand against the kitchen counter to steady myself. "So it's real," I whispered. "It's real," she said. "We'll keep you informed. Don't go near them." By noon, local stations were running the footage. 2 squad cars and an unmarked sedan idled in front of the Whitakers' brick colonial on Pine Street. Margaret Whitaker emerged first, her hair perfectly curled, wearing a beige coat like she was stepping out for brunch, not being arrested. Daniel followed, jaw set, eyes straight ahead. Behind them, Nate and Grant stood on the porch, stiff in their tailored suits, their faces pale. For years, they had been untouchable. Now the cameras saw them for what they were, a family built on secrets. The anchors spoke over each other, piecing the story together. A falsified adoption, an unreported ransom, a decades-old disappearance tied to a missing infant from Ohio. It didn't feel like my life. It felt like watching someone else's tragedy from a safe distance. Only I was the center of it. That night, my apartment was filled with calls from reporters, unknown numbers, and curious coworkers. I silenced them all. The only call I answered was from my attorney, Charlotte Pierce, a woman whose calm voice could make hurricanes seem orderly. "They'll file charges within 24 hours, she said. "Kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy. Your statement will help close the gap between the forged papers and the missing child case." I sat on my couch, staring at the flickering TV screen showing the Whitaker house surrounded by yellow tape. "Do I have to face them?" "Eventually," she said gently. "But not alone." 2 days later, I stood in the Montgomery County Courthouse for the preliminary hearing. The courtroom smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and old wood. The room was smaller than I expected, and everything about it felt too bright, too sharp. The Whitakers sat at the defense table, their attorney whispering urgently between them. Margaret's face was composed, her posture immaculate. Daniel looked older, tired, but unrepentant. Nate and Grant sat a few rows behind, avoiding my gaze. I wondered if they had ever questioned the story they'd been told about me, or if believing the lie had simply been easier. When the clerk called my name, I walked to the witness rail. Charlotte touched my sleeve before I took the stand. "You don't have to speak today," she murmured. "I want to," I said, though my heart thudded against my ribs. I took the oath, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "My name is Sierra Hart," I began. "I live in Philadelphia. I'm employed at a marketing firm on Walnut Street. I was raised by Daniel and Margaret Whitaker." The prosecutor asked gentle questions about my childhood, my education, the family dynamic. I spoke of the rules, the silences, the way my birthday was treated like an inconvenience, the way Arthur Whitaker, their father, had been the only one who ever showed affection. I described the moment I requested my adoption papers, the discovery of the forged signatures, the conversation with E. Caldwell, and the DNA confirmation that proved who I really was. As I spoke, Margaret's expression cracked. It wasn't guilt. It was fury. Daniel stared straight ahead, unmoving. When I finished, the judge nodded, then set the next hearing date. Bail was denied for Margaret. Daniel posted a $200,000 bond with property collateral and was released under restricted movement orders. The gallery murmured as the session adjourned. I walked outside into a thin slice of winter sunlight and felt, for the first time, the weight of freedom and fear at once. That afternoon, I boarded a train to Ohio. The trip to Cleveland Heights felt endless, each mile another thread unraveling the life I'd known. When I arrived, Jack Morales met me at the platform, holding a small folder. "They're waiting for you," he said. My hands trembled as I followed him into a quiet residential neighborhood lined with trees stripped bare for winter. When we stopped in front of a white colonial with black shutters, I froze. A porch swing swayed gently in the wind. I had dreamed of this place before, without ever knowing it existed. The door opened. A woman stepped out, her hair chestnut and streaked with gray, her eyes soft and bright. Behind her stood a man whose stance mirrored mine exactly. Same shoulders, same cautious steadiness. "Sierra," she whispered. I nodded, and Elise Cooper crossed the porch before I could move. Her arms wrapped around me with the force of 29 lost years. Daniel Cooper followed, his hand resting on my back, his voice shaking as he said, "Welcome home, sweetheart." We didn't rush anything. We went inside, made tea, and sat in the living room. The walls were covered in framed photographs. Jonah in a baseball uniform, Lila in a graduation gown, Elise and Daniel standing beside a Christmas tree. On the mantel, a framed flyer caught my eye. Missing, baby girl Cooper. Last seen May 1996. The phone number at the bottom was faded, almost illegible. I realized this room had been frozen in waiting. We talked for hours. Elise told me about the day I disappeared, about how the police had found their car empty in the parking lot, about the ransom note demanding $60,000 in unmarked bills. The drop location had been compromised. No child had ever been recovered. I told them about Philadelphia. The house, the dinners filled with silence, Arthur's kindness, the night I found out. Elise listened with tears streaming silently down her face. When evening came, I didn't want to leave. Still, I needed space to think, to breathe. I booked a small month-to-month rental a few blocks away, a second-floor flat with creaky floors, a view of the park, and a tiny kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon. The rent was $1,480, paid up front. Tia sent flowers the next morning, white peonies in a mason jar, with a note that read, "Bloom where the truth finds you." For the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I had stepped into a story that had been waiting for me all along, a story that finally made sense. But beneath the calm, I knew the next chapter would demand more courage than I'd ever needed before. Because while I had found where I came from, I still had to face what came next. The plea deals came down 3 weeks after the indictment. The prosecutors wanted full disclosure. Every account, every dollar withdrawn, every accomplice who helped hide me. Margaret Whitaker resisted until a federal agent mentioned wire fraud. That was the word that broke her composure. Within days, she signed the agreement. Daniel followed, his signature shaky, his face gray under the courtroom lights. For the first time, the Whitakers' names appeared in print not on charity donor lists or real estate articles, but beneath the heading Criminal Proceedings. I attended the final hearing in a simple navy dress, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what the morning required. Closure wasn't the right word for what I felt. Closure implied something tidy. This was messy, aching, unfinished. But it was the truth, and that was enough. When the judge read the sentences, the courtroom was silent except for the scratch of pens and the soft slide of papers across polished wood. Margaret received 30 years in federal custody. Daniel, 22. There was talk of restitution, parole conditions, and cooperation clauses. None of it erased what had been done, but it established something essential: accountability. When the gavel fell, I exhaled so deeply that my chest hurt. Outside, reporters swarmed like bees, microphones thrust forward. One woman shouted, "Do you feel whole now, Miss Hart?" I stopped, met her gaze, and said, "I don't feel whole. I feel ongoing." Then I walked away. The reward fund, now $248,400 plus new donations that came pouring in after the trial, was turned into something better than a headline. With my parents' blessing, we established the Cooper Hart Trust for the found and the searching. Half of its interest would go toward missing persons outreach and free DNA testing. The rest would fund a dream I'd carried quietly for years: a bakery. We found a corner space in Ohio City, an old brick storefront with wide windows and sunlight that made the dust sparkle. The rent was fair, $2, $600 a month, and the renovation estimate came to $82,000. It was steep, but the trust covered it. Elise brought her handwritten recipe cards, yellowed and soft from decades of use. Daniel, my real father, painted the trim himself, muttering about crooked lines. Jonah built shelving from reclaimed oak. Lila designed the logo, a stylized sunrise over a loaf of bread. We named it Second Morning. Opening day was colder than we expected, the kind of morning that turns breath into smoke. Yet by 7 a.m., a line stretched down the block. The air smelled of cinnamon, butter, and something else, hope, maybe. Elise stood at the register, smiling through tears as customers handed over bills and coins. One woman dropped a crisp 100 into the donation jar and whispered, "For the ones still missing." By noon, every shelf was empty. Lemon loaves are gone. Blackberry hand pies are gone. The sugar-dusted croissants I'd worried no one would buy gone first. I boxed one of the last loaves, wrapped it in brown paper, tied it with twine, and mailed it overnight to Philadelphia. The shipping label read, Tia Reynolds, South Street Florals. Inside, I tucked a note that said, "You are the first bakery. This is the second." The bakery wasn't just a business. It became a gathering place. People came for the pastries, but stayed for what the space meant. We hosted Hope Nights every other Thursday, offering free coffee to anyone searching for a loved one. Detectives, volunteers, and families sat around the same tables, trading names, stories, and sometimes tears. One evening, a father from Pittsburgh found a lead about his missing son through another attendee. A week later, he returned just to say thank you. Not everything was easy. Healing never is. There were nights when I'd close the shop, rest my head on the counter, and wonder if I was strong enough to keep all the pieces together. Elise would stop by quietly with coffee, her eyes kind, and say, "You've already done the hardest part, Sierra. You've found your way home." 2 weeks after the opening, I received an unexpected message from my attorney. Nate and Grant Whitaker wanted to meet. No lawyers, no press. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met by a public fountain near Rittenhouse Square. They looked older than I remembered, their confidence dimmed. Nate spoke first. "We thought we were protecting our family. We were wrong." Grant's voice cracked. "We were also children who became the kind of men our parents wanted, not the kind anyone needed." I studied them for a long moment before answering. "I can't make room for excuses. But I can make room for boundaries." They both nodded. Grant slipped an envelope onto the bench. "A donation to your foundation. Quietly, if you'll accept it."
I didn't open it then.
I only said, "Quiet is fine. Truth is louder anyway." When I returned to Cleveland, I dove into expanding the foundation's reach. We allocated $40,000 to fund free DNA kits nationwide and partnered with a nonprofit that supported cold case detectives. Every time I signed a grant letter, I thought of E. Caldwell, the elderly clerk whose courage had started everything. We sent her a care package, one of our signature cinnamon loaves, and a note that read, "Your truth fed the beginning of ours." The day of sentencing arrived months later. It was quick, almost anticlimactic. Margaret didn't look at me as the judge confirmed her sentence. Daniel glanced back once, his eyes wet but resigned. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something quieter, like the moment before a storm breaks and the air smells clean. That evening, I walked through second morning after closing. The chairs were stacked, the ovens cooling. I counted the register, $1, $2.37 for the day, and swept the floor, listening to the soft scrape of the broom. On the wall behind the counter hung a framed copy of my corrected birth certificate. Sierra Elise Cooperhart. The reflection in the glass caught the warm glow of the streetlights outside, and for once, the name felt like it belonged to me. Before locking up, I checked my messages. One was from Detective Ruiz. "We found something." Another deposit box, different bank, different state. Might be connected. I smiled faintly. The story wasn't over yet. I stood under the faint hum of the exit sign, breathing in the scent of sugar, butter, and cinnamon. My life had been remade from ashes and paper trails, from lies that turned into light. I thought of all the families still waiting, all the children still lost, and whispered a silent promise to keep baking, keep fighting, keep searching. When I stepped outside, snow had begun to fall, soft, unhurried flakes that clung to my coat and hair. Across the street, the bakery's windows glowed like a beacon against the night. My life now was made of small, steady miracles, a porch swing in Ohio, a trust fund for the missing, a family rebuilt from truth. And somewhere, miles away, another locked drawer waited to be opened.